Users of Reddit, what's something that you've done while in the mood and regret? Story 1. My friend Tavian and I were tasked with entertaining a visiting professor from a university in the Netherlands. After a couple of drinks at a pub in Kalwick, he casually mentioned he wanted to see some women. We assumed he meant conversation and atmosphere, so we took him to an upscale lounge that featured softly suggestive performances. After one beer, he leaned in and whispered he wanted something more intense. Since transactional companionship is legal here in Marindale, we took him to a well-known adult bar on the outskirts of town. The place was surreal. Within minutes, this distinguished academic arranged a private session with one of the performers. 15 minutes later, he reappeared, sat down, and quietly said he was tired. On the way back to his hotel, he began crying, talking about his wife and children, and giving us heartfelt advice about cherishing our significant others. I've rarely witnessed such a raw display of remorse. Story 2. I was at a pub in Belmere when I ran into Talia, the girl from secondary school everyone had a crush on. She still had that magnetic charm. We laughed, reminisced, and eventually I offered her a ride home. I was buzzing with anticipation, but she didn't invite me inside. Disappointed and restless, I went home and relieved myself. Not long after, Talia called, saying she felt lonely and wanted company. I rushed back, thinking I had recovered enough energy. We got close, but my body wouldn't cooperate. She began to cry, thinking it was her fault. I explained the situation. We tried again, but nothing changed. The combination of alcohol and earlier release left me unresponsive. She asked me to leave. I never heard from her again. Story 3. I was lying in the bathtub in Vexley, letting the warm water cascade over me, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Later in the day, I went to use the toilet and felt an odd sensation, like something was being pulled from between my cheeks. Panic set in. I thought something was seriously wrong. Turns out, some residue from earlier had dried and tangled with my body hair, creating a gummy seal. It was like a glue trap made from bathwater and shame. I had to take a second shower just to clean everything up. It was both painful and absurd. Story 4. When I was 22, I left a bar with a 42-year-old woman in the coastal town of Brynmere. Harmless enough, right? Until we arrived at her small flat and found her teenage son playing a loud video game in the living room. It was awkward. 15 minutes later, he went to bed, and we began fooling around on the couch. The next morning, her car wouldn't start. She'd left the headlights on. She had driven us the previous night. My phone was nearly dead, so I messaged my friend Marek to pick me up. It died shortly after. We decided to get margaritas at a budget Mexican spot nearby. At 10 a.m., I sat there smoking while reflecting on how many strangers that kid might have seen his mother bring home. When Marek finally arrived, he was grinning ear to ear. I hugged her goodbye and left, realizing I should have done so hours earlier. Story 5. When I was a child, I had a giant stuffed bear named Norbit that I used to ride like a horse. One day post-bath, I jumped on him while still naked. Something about the texture set off a strange new sensation. That moment spiraled into a bizarre routine. I'd rush home from school just to recreate that feeling. Eventually, Norbit vanished. So, I moved on to pillows, then sleeping on them afterward. My older brother Tolan once walked in with a magazine and a laptop, saying, "Watch how they clean up afterward." He gave me the most direct talk imaginable. Years later, while drunk at a family New Year's party, he brought it up. Turns out, my door had always been wide open, and my siblings had witnessed everything. They'd laughed for years before deciding to intervene. I still cringe remembering it. Story 6. At 18, I took an impulsive bus ride from New Bastille, New Jersey to Albridge, Canada. I had only spoken to this girl for a week online, but I expedited a passport just to make it happen. The trip there was fine. The return was chaos. I stayed at a bed and breakfast far from the city, closer to a tiny village called Carrick. No rides, no local transit. The hosts eventually drove me to the station, but I missed my bus. I was stranded in Montreal for 8 hours, waiting for a connection to New York City. When I finally arrived at 3 a.m., there were no buses to Jersey for hours. I took a train to Philbridge, then another to New Bastille. The return journey took longer than the entire trip. Story 7. Once, I had a three-way with 2 women. One was stunning, the other made my skin crawl. Her personality was abrasive, and her attempts at intimacy were unsettling. I focused on the one I was attracted to. After she reached her peak, she left the room. I was left with the other woman, still buzzing and intoxicated. I pushed through, finished, and regretted it instantly. What made it worse was that it happened 3 more times. Every time I invited the one I liked, she brought her friend. I never learned. I always felt hollow and uncomfortable afterward. Story 8. Years ago, I worked at a company in Avonlock. We worked absurd hours, sometimes overnight, but the team was like family. Twice a year, our CEO rented out venues for wild parties, bars, beaches, even yachts. One night, after a long project, I hooked up with a colleague in a meeting room. Our desks were adjacent. Things got awkward fast. She developed feelings, I didn't. She eventually quit, and I lost a close friend. A few years later, a new hire, a strict woman named Mrs. Elrin, filed a lawsuit against the company's culture. Everything changed. People left. The firm shut down. Still, it was the best job I ever had. Story 9. In 2017, I visited Meriden Park with my girlfriend and her family. She was into intense experiences, and during the Pirates of the Caldera ride, she handed me a remote. It controlled something she was wearing. I activated it discreetly. Later, on the Haunted Manor ride, we were alone. She reached her moment and whispered it in my ear. That night, she fell asleep next to me. Her mother had forbidden it, but I didn't want to wake her. Bored, I went through her phone and saw messages from someone else, clear signs of cheating. I didn't confront her. I didn't want to ruin the trip. The next day, I went along with everything, even being intimate. I cried during it. She never knew why. Story 10. As a teenager, I went to a faith retreat in Darswell with my father and his friend. I forgot to pack anything useful for solo relaxation in the shower. I found a mysterious cream labeled Arctic Heat among their things. It felt cool at first, so I used more. The warm water opened my pores and the pain began. It was like setting fire to myself. I couldn't scream. My dad was in the next room. I silently suffered, rinsing and trying not to faint. To this day, I can't look at that brand name without wincing. Story 11. I had been seeing a man named Rowan for a few weeks, handsome, kind, and deeply thoughtful. One night, he stayed over during what I refer to as my most easily excitable days of the month. I had hoped the night would take a romantic turn, but instead, he focused on conversation, complimenting my personality and saying he just wanted to understand me better. His sweetness only heightened my desire. After he fell asleep, I slipped into the bathroom to relieve some tension. It took longer than expected. He knocked on the door, startling me so badly that I slipped, landing awkwardly with one hand in the toilet. My underwear was around my knees, my bra askew, and my hair a mess. He opened the door in concern and was greeted by that unfortunate tableau. And yes, I had forgotten to flush. It was mortifying. Story 12. While living in Cordova, Spain, I had a crush on a girl from Sevillita. She was radiant. To get closer, I'd go clubbing with her and her friends. One night, I drank too much and one of her friends, whom I barely knew, took an interest in me. We ended up going back to my apartment. Midway through, I realized she was a virgin. I tried to be gentle. The next day was awkward. I didn't even remember her name until I saw it saved in my phone. That evening, I finally kissed the girl I had been chasing, right in front of the one from the night before. She got drunk, fell down the stairs, and was taken away in an ambulance. I had a great relationship with my crush afterward, but I still feel haunted by that first night. I took something sacred from someone I barely knew. Story 13. I worked with a woman named Leora at a restaurant in Fundel. We were incredibly close, best friends really. She had a boyfriend, and I had just ended a long-term relationship. When the pandemic hit, the restaurant closed, but we stayed in touch. Months later, we began hanging out again. After some wine one evening, she tried to kiss me. I declined gently, wanting to preserve the friendship. Later, she got sick from drinking, and I helped her into the shower. Then I gave in. We became physical that night and continued for a few weeks. She developed deeper feelings, but her ex was still in the picture emotionally. Our bond slowly unraveled. We haven't spoken in months. I miss the way she lit up every room. Story 14. In a club in New Frith, after taking a bit of something to elevate the night, I met a strange man claiming to be a producer. His girlfriend stood nearby. He asked if I liked performing certain acts and said it was her birthday. He wanted to give her a gift, which meant me. I laughed it off, but eventually went along. Their Airbnb was across the street. He wanted to tie her up and watch. I nearly left, but he bribed others to attend and coaxed me into staying. It was a surreal experience. Halfway through, he hushed everyone, worried about the landlord upstairs. I felt dirty for days. I got tested. Thankfully, I was fine. But the memory lingers. Story 15. I bought a high-powered personal device. It was incredibly effective, so much so that I used it nearly every day. To hide the sound, I started blasting true crime podcasts. It made sense at the time. They're long, immersive, and no one would suspect what I was doing. Unfortunately, I accidentally created a bizarre mental link between crime stories and arousal. Now, whenever I hear narratives about disappearances, trials, or serial offenders, I feel a strange reaction. It's distressing. I don't know how to undo it. I'm ashamed and worried it's rewired something important in my brain. Story 16. My wife and I drove to my parents' house in Windermere for the holidays. One night, I went out with local friends while she stayed behind. After drinking a bit too much, I returned late and crept upstairs. Thinking I was entering the guest room, I slipped into bed and began cuddling. I was surprised by the lack of pajamas, but assumed she was being spontaneous. I became more affectionate, but she softly resisted. I misheard her saying stop as something playful. Then she said, "Scott," my father's name. I turned on the light. It was my mother. She screamed. I bolted out of the room in horror. Turns out my wife had swapped rooms with her because the bed was larger. I had no idea. That moment still haunts me. Story 17. I once called a phone chat line that turned out to be a scam. Months later, I got a call from someone claiming to be with an investigation unit. They played a recording of my call and threatened to send it to my parents unless I paid $18. I panicked. I filed a report with the police in Claverton. They said there wasn't much they could do and advised me to tell my parents. I did. My mom laughed. My dad said, "Next time use headphones." I changed my number. Somewhere out there, my voice is probably still floating on some shady server. Story 18. When I was 11, I was sick and lying on the floor near my mother's bed in a small guest room in Ainswick. My comfort object was an oversized Scooby-Doo plush. That night, my mom grabbed it to cuddle with while she slept. I waited until about 3 a.m. and carefully pried it from her arms to use for my own purposes. I don't know what compelled me. Afterward, I had no towels and used an old shirt to clean up. I shoved the plush into the closet and stared at my reflection in the mirror, wondering what was wrong with me. Even now, I shudder remembering it. Story 19. I once returned to an ex who had cheated on me. She had been seeing a guy who played Robin in a local superhero stunt show. I dropped off her belongings and swore I was done. Weeks later, she messaged me. I went over. We slept together. I felt nothing but emptiness afterward. Before leaving, I made myself a ridiculous sandwich from her fridge and sat beneath 3 framed autographed photos of her ex. I lost it. I climbed a ladder and drew absurd doodles on each one. It was petty, but it was cathartic. I left with the sandwich and a tiny sliver of dignity. Story 20. Before I got married, I had a wild night in the suburbs of Draycott. I met a woman in her 40s at a bar. She was impressed that I drank whiskey. We went back to her place. I noticed several picture frames turned face down. 15 minutes later, her husband came home. A Marine. She hid my clothes and told me to jump out the window. I waited in the bushes in nothing but a plastic dry cleaning wrap. Eventually, she tossed me a trash bag to wear. I walked back to a backup apartment I'd been using. A while later, I brought another girl there. She stayed the night. I returned days later with someone new, only to find the first girl still there, calling me baby, in front of my date. She had stocked the fridge. My friend Owen offered to take her off my hands. I agreed. Story 21. During a work trip to the city of Norbridge, I was supposed to meet up with colleagues, but by the time I arrived at the bar, they'd already gone. I stayed behind to finish a drink when 2 women approached me. We hit it off quickly, and one of them started suggesting I spend the night with her single friend, who, while not my usual type, seemed nice enough. We drank more, and she invited me back to her place, which, inconveniently, was in a different town. I hesitated, but she insisted she had work at 8 a.m., and I had a 9 a.m. train, so we took the last train out. Midway through the ride, she went to the bathroom and disappeared for 20 minutes. When she returned, she was completely out of it. Shortly after, the train was replaced by a bus due to a route closure. She began vomiting and was denied boarding. I refused to leave her alone. I eventually found a cab to take us to her apartment near a hospital. She paid, then we had a bizarrely energetic night. Her entire flat was dinosaur-themed. She wore a dino hoodie and made dino noises. I left the next day questioning every decision I'd made. Story 22. At 21, I worked as a counselor at a summer camp in Halmsbury. I had known Serafina, another counselor, since the previous year. We were both of age, she was 19, but our timing had always been off. That summer, we reconnected and eventually ended up in her family's camper, sharing an intimate moment while her siblings watched a movie in the next room. Halfway through, she reminded me to pull out since neither of us was prepared. Afterward, she fell asleep, and I had to finish the job myself in my own RV. The next morning, I saw a guy waiting outside her camper. Turns out, they'd been dating for 2 months, and I had no clue. He was large, quiet, and clearly unaware of what had happened. I walked away. She wasn't very kind, and the whole thing left me with a bitter taste. I got tested the next day. Story 23. After a difficult breakup, I moved to a small building in Elredale where I knew no one. For 5 months, I kept to myself. Then one Saturday, a woman from the ground floor named Corinne knocked on my door and invited me to a party. She was several years younger and clearly drunk when I arrived. She flirted heavily. Eventually, we went to her room. I hadn't been with anyone in months and was feeling desperate. The moment things began, I lost control and finished in less than 10 seconds. It got everywhere, her face, hair, and shirt. She had to walk through the entire party to get to the bathroom. Everyone laughed. I felt terrible. I don't regret the act, but the aftermath was far more embarrassing than I could have prepared for. Story 24. At 23, I had a date lined up and stopped by my cousin Myron's place beforehand. He offered me a pill for extra stamina. I didn't hesitate and popped both he handed me. He immediately asked, "Did you just take both?" I said yes. He looked horrified. "You're only supposed to take half of one." I shrugged. On the date at a sports bar in Harrowwick, I tried to remain calm as the World Cup played on every screen. I don't even like soccer, but I had to sit there for over 3 hours, pretending Paraguay was my team while trying not to black out from all the blood going to the wrong place. Story 25. At 17, I started dating a girl named Alira who lived in a chaotic, party-filled house just blocks from my parents' place in Brindleport. She was tall, magnetic, and troubled. I ignored the red flags, her violent dreams, her father's threats, and her pressure to help her secure illegal substances. One night, I woke up to her straddling me and pressing a sharp object to my chest, accusing me of cheating based on a dream. Eventually, she left me for someone else. Years later, she got clean and reached out. I kept my distance, but stability didn't last. Her social media posts became erratic, then stopped entirely. I don't know if she's alive. I've since rebuilt my life, but I still think about her and hope she finds peace. Story 26. Back in Lingate High, a girl named Renata fixated on me in a way that bordered on obsession. She'd call my house constantly, get visibly upset if I spoke to other girls, and even somehow got my home number. My mom would usually intercept her calls. Eventually, she backed off, until one night I was drunk and lonely. I called her. She came over. We slept together. I thought it was a one-time thing. She thought it was the beginning of something serious. The stalking resumed, more intense than before. I nearly filed a restraining order. After graduation, I moved out, and she eventually stopped. But I never forgot how one lonely decision almost derailed my senior year. Story 27. I once ordered a device from the internet that's popular in certain niche communities. I researched beforehand, read articles, and thought I'd taken all the right precautions. It was snug but manageable. I wore it for nearly 3 days, and then disaster struck. I woke up with excruciating pain. A natural arousal response had caused internal pressure, and the blood couldn't circulate. I panicked and pulled it off, damaging the veins in the process. Now, I deal with symptoms resembling a condition called Peyronie's disease. It's embarrassing. I've lied about it to partners, blaming a dog or a ring. I found one person online who experienced the same thing. We still write each other. It helps. Story 28. At 20, I met a woman in her 30s at a bar in Maplewyn. She wasn't my type, but I was drunk and lonely. Neither of us had a place, so I paid for a cab and a cheap hotel. She said she'd split the cost later. The rate turned out to be twice what was advertised. I paid. Once inside, she said she was tired and went to sleep. I'd spent a significant chunk of my income for nothing. The next morning, she didn't offer to pay a cent. I was too annoyed to even try again. I left feeling used and foolish. Story 29. My cousin Lorik and I were on a family vacation at a beachside resort in Carowell. We'd been trying to meet people all week. One night, two women in their 40s arrived at the bar. Lorik hit it off with one of them, a red-haired woman built like a linebacker. I left him to it and met up with other guests. The next morning, he showed up at breakfast grinning, telling me they'd hooked up on a lounge chair while a security guard watched from nearby bushes. The next night, he met someone even more beautiful. I told him, sometimes you have to slay the dragon to meet the queen. He still laughs about it. Story 30. In 2002, we drove from San Vero to Acuna, Mexico, about 2.5 hours. My friend claimed he knew the area. We got drunk, ended up at a club, and then at a surreal adult venue. An elderly performer came on stage while a vendor sold model sailboats. I bought two. Later, our Russian friend Drago wanted to hire a worker. We picked someone who looked like a cartoon maid. Drago returned, complaining about the experience. On the way back, we got pulled over. The police wanted $100. We gave them $65 in change. At the border, we didn't have toll money. One of us hit the gas, and a stapler was thrown at the car. Somehow we made it across. I kept those sailboats for 15 years. Story 31. Just before finals at Commerce University, I, a gay student in rural Kentucky, decided to meet up with someone I'd been talking to online for months. His name was Brenner. Though I wasn't physically or emotionally attracted to him, I convinced myself his personality might compensate. I was mostly a virgin, and loneliness clouded my judgment. We met in person, spent the day together, and ended up in a hotel. Everything about the experience was awkward. I pretended to enjoy it, and even faked a climax. Afterward, I sat in the shower for nearly an hour, feeling like I had betrayed myself. The next morning, I had a panic attack and asked to be driven home. That night left me confused about my identity, my emotions, and whether I'd ever be able to enjoy intimacy without guilt or anxiety. Story 32. In the final months of school in Galesmere, I ruined a close friendship with someone named Elson. We were inseparable. We'd escape our troubled homes by driving around town, talking for hours. One night, we became physical. It was casual at first. Then after graduation, I reconnected with an old crush. We kissed. Word got around. Elson thought we were exclusive. I hadn't realized that. Things erupted. The fallout shattered not just our bond, but the entire friend group. I've never found a circle quite like that again. The experience taught me the painful cost of poor communication and blurred boundaries. Story 33. When I was 20, I drove 1,464 miles from Rensselaer to Wexham on the promise that I'd get lucky. The trip cost me 2 wheel hubs, a battery, and a window motor. Fueled by an ounce of weed and teenage recklessness, I nearly crashed after falling asleep at the wheel. Once we arrived, I met the girl. We hooked up on a wicker couch in a basement after a game of pool. It was the start of a whirlwind relationship. A few years later, we were engaged. Then, within 2 weeks, my father died, my car was totaled, and she left me for my friend's cousin. She asked for the rest of her stimulus check and disappeared. I've had trust issues ever since. Story 34. At 18, during my first year at Grenley College, I met a woman named Marlena, 10 years older, with a noticeable mustache and breath that could clear a hallway. We bonded over our love for Dungeons and Dragons and fantasy games. One evening, she asked me to walk her to class and suddenly requested a kiss. Awkward, but I agreed. Then she asked if I wanted more and led me to a dimly lit campus bathroom. While in a stall, she began without hesitation. Just then, someone entered. At first, they used the urinal, then sat down and unleashed the most horrific bathroom episode I've ever heard. The stench was unbearable. She didn't stop. I finished with my nose buried in my shirt, trying not to gag. She later asked how it was. I lied and said it was great. Story 35. In 1983, when I was 17, I dated a girl far out of my league. She told me if I came to her school's football game that night, I could do whatever I wanted with her. I was elated. The only problem? I had no idea how to get there. My mom asked if I needed help with directions, and I foolishly said no. I picked the wrong freeway, again and again. Out of 6 possible routes, I chose every incorrect one. By the time I arrived, the game was long over, and I didn't even know where she lived. I drove home heartbroken. She broke up with me shortly after. I still think about that night and wonder what could have happened if I had just asked for help. Story 36. After quitting my job in Varnlock, I visited a former co-worker, Lana, for for a casual night. Her apartment was a chaotic mess, cats everywhere, food containers on the floor, and her dad asleep in the next room. We got intimate on a broken futon in front of large bay windows. I wasn't comfortable, but it happened. Afterward, I fell asleep. Suddenly, I woke up to someone punching me in the face. Her boyfriend of 2 weeks had seen us through the window. I pinned him down until he calmed. He was hurt, not dangerous. She admitted she was seeing multiple people. I drove home at 4 a.m., buzzed and bleeding. A week later, I had to go to the clinic. Thankfully, it was minor. Still, I learned a lot that night, about others and about myself. Story 37. In my early teens, growing up in a strict house in Delwyn, I had very limited access to media. Out of curiosity and frustration, I began recording myself on school laptops after class. I volunteered to clean up the classroom, waited until the coast was clear, and used the webcam for personal exploration. At home, when the babysitter took my siblings out, I did the same with the family computer. I always deleted the videos. One day, my dad tried to restore a file and found the recordings in the trash bin. He didn't yell, just gave a long talk about how adult content could ruin relationships. It was the most awkward moment of my youth. I still shudder thinking about it. Story 38. I met a guy named Alaric on a dating site for goth and alternative people. He lived in another state, but after weeks of flirtation, I agreed to meet him. It had just snowed heavily, and I drove through icy roads to a motel near his place in Grenthorne. He'd spent the entire drive mocking me for being cautious. When I arrived, I was instantly disappointed. He looked nothing like his pictures and reeked of sweat and stale beer. He became aggressive, demanding intimacy. I refused, and he lashed out verbally. I left and stayed with a friend nearby. He spammed me with vile messages the next day. I blocked him everywhere. I'm now engaged to someone who treats me with respect, but I'll never forget how dangerous that meeting could have been. Story 39. In 2019, I was at a garage party in Raventon when someone's grandfather had a health scare. I was still coming down from mushrooms, but ended up driving them to the hospital. He was okay. After that, I spent the day partying, more mushrooms, drinking, even a balancing pill. Then a girl I liked called and asked me to come over. She lived 2 hours away. I drove through a storm to get there, completely exhausted. I fell asleep briefly at the wheel and rear-ended an SUV full of children. Thankfully, no one was hurt. The police came. I was given a DUI. That night changed me. I was lucky it wasn't worse. I never want to test fate like that again. Story 40. As a teen in West Darnell, I used to joke flirt with my best friend, Ellis. I'd say things like, "Come over, we'll game, snack, make out, just kidding." One day he responded, "I'm serious." I played along, thinking he was joking too. He came over. We gamed. Then he asked if I had protection. I handed him one, and he said, "Get ready." We started, but a few minutes in, he stopped and said he wasn't feeling it. He left for the bathroom, came back, and told me not to worry. After that, he began distancing himself. He got off social media, quit gaming, stopped replying. Finally, he said he needed a break from everything. It's been 3 months. I don't know if I lost him because of that night or if life just pulled us apart. Story 41. During a summer in Daransfield, my close friend Talon and I developed a quiet pattern of escaping difficult home lives by driving around and talking for hours. One night, while parked overlooking the old quarry, we opened up emotionally and ended up kissing. That led to a casual relationship that lasted through the end of high school. Later, I reconnected with someone I had liked in the past, someone Talon also knew. We kissed at a party, and word spread fast. Talon thought we were exclusive. I hadn't communicated clearly. The fallout was intense. Not only did I lose Talon, but our entire friend group fractured. I still carry the guilt of that misstep, and wish I had been more honest from the beginning. Story 42. When I was 19, I drove across the country from Eastall to Luramore with 2 friends after hearing one of them promise we'd get lucky. We were supposed to rent a car, but ended up taking mine. The journey was plagued with mechanical failures, 2-wheel hubs, a busted fuel regulator, and a dying battery. I nearly fell asleep behind the wheel on an empty highway. Somehow we made it. I met a girl, and after a few days of tension, we got intimate on a sunken couch in a cluttered den. For a while, we were inseparable. We even got engaged. Then in 2 short weeks, my father passed away, my car was wrecked, and she left me for someone else. She texted me while I was at work. "I'm out." She asked for the last of her stimulus check and vanished. I haven't trusted easily since. Story 43. At 18, I went on my first college road trip to a small town called Mere Haven. I ended up meeting a local woman named Saphira, charismatic, bold, and 10 years older than me. We connected over fantasy games and late-night philosophy. One night, while walking her to her car after a campus event, she asked if we could mess around. I nervously agreed. She took me to a public restroom near the quad. It was dim, cold, and echoed like a cavern. Just as things started, someone entered the bathroom and unleashed what can only be described as a gastrointestinal apocalypse. The smell was unbearable. She didn't stop. I had to cover my face with my hoodie to survive the moment. We never spoke again, but I still remember the horror and absurdity of that night. Story 44. When I was 17, I dated a girl named Alien who was impossibly out of my league. She invited me to her school's football game in Dalebrook and said that if I came, we could do whatever I wanted. I was ecstatic. This was before smartphones, so I relied on handwritten directions. My mom offered to help, but I declined. I ended up taking every wrong freeway exit, 5 in total. When I finally arrived, the game had ended and the crowd was gone. I didn't know her address. I drove home defeated. She broke up with me a few days later. I still think about what might have been if I'd just let my mom help. Story 45. After quitting my job at a warehouse in Selbridge, I reached out to an old coworker named Kira. She lived in a cluttered apartment with 6 cats and her father, who worked nights. We got intimate in the living room in full view of the bay window. It wasn't great, but I was lonely and went through with it. I passed out on the couch. Hours later, I woke to someone hitting me in the face. It was her new boyfriend, who had seen us from outside. He was furious. I managed to subdue him and explained he probably wasn't the only one she was seeing. She confirmed it. He left in silence. I drove home with a swollen cheek and a sense of regret that still lingers.